I don't often describe cameras as massive, but I think in this case that description would certainly fit. This is the Exakta 66. This is the second of three models to be named Exakta 66. From what I've read and what I've seen, none of the Exakta 66 models look the same, operate similarly, or share any of the same parts, including the lens mount. This also is informally known as the Exakta 66 vertical, not because it took vertical photos, because obviously 6x6 is neither vertical nor horizontal. In fact, it's square, so it really refers to the shape of the camera. You'll see that there is a 66 right here. This came out of East Germany. It was made by this camera maker. Trying to find the pronunciation of this camera maker was a bit difficult, and I searched quite a bit, listened to a few videos, and Wikipedia has it as Ihagee. What appears to be a J is actually an I. In fact, most people might try to say Ihagee, but in fact, it appears to be Ihagee. I was thinking it might be more like Ihagee, sort of like Mr. Miyagi without the M, but that's not the case. This leather does not match the rest of the body. When I removed that leather to do some work on it, it shrunk, it crinkled, and then I had to discard it because it was damaged beyond repair. So I had a piece of other leather that I put on there. I think I might go with a coarser grain leather to really match the rest of the body. Okay, let's talk about this camera. This is an impressive camera, any way you look at it, and it's impressive both in its size and its weight. I would say its performance is okay. I really need to shoot it again. When I took it out, I was having a few issues, not having to do with the camera, but really my unfamiliarity with the camera, despite having dry fired it a number of times. So in the front, this small little lever is really used to release the viewfinder. And you can separate the viewfinder from the body. Supposedly a pentaprism was planned for this camera. I don't believe it ever went into production. Probably never made it past the prototype stage. So instead you have a waist level finder. And here on the front of the camera, we have writing that indicates the camera maker and the city of production, which was Dresden, and after the end of World War II, was in the Eastern Zone, which became East Germany. This camera was introduced in 1953. From what I've read, it was only produced for 2 years, and a total of 2,400 cameras were produced. I'm not sure how many are left today, enough that you see them pop up here and there on the secondary market. I bought this camera more than a decade ago. I bought it actually from Germany. It took quite a while to get here, and when it finally did arrive, I ended up having to pay DHL, I think like a $50 fee in addition to the transport costs, but you know, whatever, that's life. This camera has a proprietary bayonet mount, and as I mentioned earlier, I don't believe this lens mount is shared with either of the other Exakta 66 models. The lens that came with this camera is constructed of heavy steel and brass. The weight of the lens is significant. Obviously manual focus because there was no autofocus at that time. You'll notice that this is a coated lens. This is a coated East German Carl Zeiss Jena Tessar. The East German lenses were still marked in centimeters, whereas the post-war lenses for West Germany were marked in millimeters. This is an f2.8. Many people believe the Tessar was stretched too far at f2.8, and I think it really depends upon the format. Although I will tend to agree that f2.8 probably one stop too far for medium format. f3.5 seems to be better, and some people believe that the original design coming in at f6.3 was probably a better lens. By the time the 1950s arrived, an f6.3 maximum aperture for a lens was inadequate, was never going to satisfy the market needs. You'll notice this big thing here, that's simply a foot to keep the camera from falling over. Without that foot, it would certainly tip forward because of the weight of the camera. This has a waist level finder. There are no focusing aids. It really is just a large condenser lens with it being frosted or ground to a matte finish on the underside. There is a correct way and an incorrect way to put the viewfinder back into its folded position. The three major slats, let me show you this. So to open it, you simply pull back on this small lever and it snaps open. Now you can see the numbers 1, 2, and 3. So when you close the viewfinder, hold in number 1, then number 2, then number 3, and then finally hold that shut. Let's take a look at this viewing hood one more time. I wanted to talk about something. So here we are, we open it up, it snaps open. And like many cameras with reflex viewing, in which you have a hood rather than a pentaprism, you often had a magnifier. So to raise the magnifier with this camera, you'll see these two buttons and a small downward pointing arrow. So simply push those two buttons down and the magnifier will pop up into place, like that. However, unlike most magnifiers, there's an extra step you take. And so what you do is you pull up on the magnifier and then you push in on the sides of the hood. You can see how that really blocks nearly all of the stray light. It makes for a much better experience when trying to focus. Of course, you do have light coming in through. So in practice, I found this to be very effective at keeping out as much as stray light as possible. The fact that you can enclose this into a pretty decent box, I think, bodes well for this camera. Now, when it's time to collapse the magnifier, simply pull up on the magnifier again, and the two sides are going to pop out, like so. Then you can just simply push the magnifier back into place. And so when you're finished with using the camera, or you simply want to stow the hood, or that is, put it back into its folded position, it's very simple. 1, 2, 3, 4. As I mentioned, if you push down on that small lever on the front, the viewfinder is removable. So the way the focusing screen works is that the curved side faces your eyeball, or faces your eye. The matte side faces the mirror. So the matte side is on the underside, and the curved side is on the is facing upward. Here's your strap eyelets, sort of small for such a massive camera. So on this side of the camera, many things. This is your lens release. Pull back toward the back of the camera, and you can then rotate the lens. You'll notice the lens has a small hole here in its mount, and that mates up with this pin. So on this side of the camera, we have a couple things going. First off, you'll notice this small dial here. Although it's a numbered dial, it's not a frame counter of any type. It's tied in with flash synchronization, and the post for flash synchronization is right here, which would be either to the left of the viewfinder as you're looking down on it, or to the right of the mirror housing if you're looking at the camera from the front. Also on this side of the camera, you have several other things. First is you have tripod socket. Now, you have a tripod socket also on the bottom. So I'm not exactly sure the purpose of putting a tripod socket on the side because this is a square format film, so there's no portrait or landscape mode. In fact, if you do put this on to a tripod so the camera is sitting on its side, which is really like this, that means you're going to have to peer at the viewing screen from the side. And also it means that the orientation of your image is going to be inverted. And by that, I mean upside down. Don't forget, because this uses reflex viewing, but without a pentaprism, your image already is laterally reversed left to right. So your image will both be inverted, upside down, and reversed left to right. Good luck in trying to make small adjustments to the tripod head in order to compose your photo when your image is laterally reversed left to right and inverted upside down. And don't forget, you'll be doing that while standing to the left of the camera. These two items are specifically related to the back. This turns when you have the back removed. When you have the back removed from the camera, this is used to either remove your exposed roll of film or to transfer your empty spool from the bottom to the top. This here is like one of those old-time magic boards in which you were able to write something, and then if you turned this small little thumb post right here, or this thumb screw, it would wipe it off, sort of like those old little toys that they was used to sell, in which you would scribble something and then peel it off to erase it. This is simply a back release. That's all it does, and I'll show you how that works in just a moment. This is your lens release. I think I had mentioned that before. Pull back, rotate the lens, and it comes off. Very simple. On the back of the camera, you have this large indentation here, and I think it appears to be simply a way for the camera makers to probably reduce the overall weight of the camera and bulk of the camera. It also makes it somewhat easier to hold, which is a bit unusual. This window is a small indicator that lets you know when your film is traveling correctly or has been loaded correctly. There's a small needle, and it will slide back and forth to let you know that your film, in fact, is moving correctly. This used the removable back. Well, first, let's go to this side of the camera. This is for releasing the viewing screen, which is that large condenser lens. Here's your frame counter, and it has some small knurling or serrations that allows you to turn it, and you have to turn it a very particular manner when you're ready to load film. This is your frame counter reset. Push upward and it will go back to 0. This small lever is simply a shutter release lock. With it in the upward position, it's impossible to depress the shutter release. When it's facing downward, as you can see, I can now press the shutter release. Here's your shutter speed dial, and these are your fast speeds running from 25 to 1/1000th of a second, plus B and T. For slower speeds, you would use this secondary dial. I don't believe this one's working correctly. I've tried it a number of times, and it just doesn't seem to be working correctly. This is very similar to how Exaktas have 2 speed dials on it, one for the fast speeds and one for the slow speeds. It's a novel system, and I think it works fairly well. These days, it seems like an unnecessary step in order to get the slower speeds. To remove the back of the camera, you simply take this lever and you turn it upward, and the back slides off. It's a lot simpler than it seems given the complexity of the camera. Film runs from bottom to top. Make sure the take-up spool's in the top chamber. Yes, your feed roll will go down here. And so how this works is you have to take your film, and so your film would be loaded so that the paper backing is on the top. So as it curls around, then your emulsion is on this side. There's a small little serrated wheel here, and it only turns one way because it's ratcheted, that will help you then get the film started onto the take-up spool. And as you can see, you would stick the tongue or leader of the film into this slot, wind it till it's somewhat tight. Then you probably could pop this open, tighten this up a little bit so you don't have any slack here, close it. Now you're going to simply replace the back on the door. All you do is slide it back into position, pull that lever downward, and now you can see how the back is attached securely to the camera. When I was shooting this camera, I found this little cutout useful. It did give me a better way to grip the camera. It is a massive camera. Once you have this hood open. So as I mentioned, so before we get too far, I did want to point out one unusual thing about this camera. By the way, this camera uses a vertically traveling cloth focal plane shutter. Luckily, the shutter curtains in this camera seem to be in good shape. They don't have any holes, and they're not damaged in any way. Now, what's unusual about this camera is that it uses a split mirror, and you'll see. There you are. You You see how it's split into two parts? A very narrow sliver at the bottom, and then your much larger mirror for the top portion. This allowed it to have a much larger mirror than would otherwise be possible. So when you release the shutter, this part of the mirror will flip forward, and that part of the mirror will flip upward. This is not a rapid return mirror. Once you release the shutter, the mirror flips up and down and stays in that position until you advance the film. And then you can see those pieces come into play again. On the bottom of the camera, not much going on. We just have the single tripod socket. So here's your shutter release. I sort of like the position of the shutter release. I wonder if they had originally planned to put it here because of this small cutout here. But moving it down here seems to work pretty well because you can use actually a number of fingers, right? You can use your ring finger, use your middle finger, or use your index finger. Your pinky finger probably, I guess you could use it. When you release the shutter, you're going to notice several things happen. The shutter speed dial turns when you release the shutter. So that means you want to keep your fingers out of the way, because if you were to rest your thumb on here, it would put a drag on the shutter and affect the actual shutter speed. It would cause your shutter to remain open much longer than you had intended. Also, when you use the slow shutter speeds, this dial also turns. So as I mentioned, this camera's a real handful. It's quite a bit of camera for a 6x6. You know, some of the folding cameras, in contrast, were much smaller than this. This is my Super Exakta, which itself is a fairly large camera, but compared with the Exakta 66 vertical, the Super Exakta actually seems small, and this is really by all measures not a tiny camera. It's one we'll take a look at in a different video. By the way, I really like this camera. I had mentioned that the Exakta 66 vertical was released in 1953, and that very same year, Kodak released this camera, which was the Chevron. Chevron replaced the Medalist. When you compare the two side by side, you can still see that this is a very substantial camera. The Chevron also is a very large camera. This is a 620 camera, meaning it uses 620 film, but it also shoots 6x6. So once again, it's a good comparison to make. We have the Rolleiflex SL66 from the 1970s, and now we finally have a camera that is equally as massive as the Exakta 66 vertical. Of course, this camera arrived more than 20 years later and was largely an electronic camera. Anyway, for size comparison, I think it's worth looking at. Now, what about the weight of this camera? Let's take a look. We'll do a couple of weigh-ins here and just see how things match up. All right, so we'll start with this one first. Look at that, 3 pounds, 10.5 ounces, so 3 pounds, 11 ounces, so pushing 4 pounds. That's quite a bit of camera. Next, we'll weigh the Super Exakta. This is the Zeiss Icon Super Exakta B, a 6x6 camera. This comes in at 2 pounds, 2 ounces, so seems fairly lightweight compared with the Exakta 66 vertical. How about the Kodak Chevron? This comes in at 2 pounds, 9.7 ounces, or 2 pounds, 10 ounces. The Exakta 66 vertical outweighs it by a pound. Finally, we have the Rolleiflex SLX. And this comes in actually at a very hefty 4 pounds. This outweighs the Exakta 66. For my final rating, I gave the Exakta 66 vertical an 8.9. While it scored high in aesthetics and its lens and a couple other areas, I think usability actually was hurt by the weight of the camera and also by just the overall boxiness and the inability to really hold this camera in a very comfortable manner. It's not a bad camera, it's just not a great camera. Being either good or bad has no bearing on a camera's value. Often, commercial failures later become collector's items. I think this might be the case here. And we've seen that through history with other cameras as well. Regardless, I sort of like the look of this camera. I didn't mind using it. I didn't hang it from my neck because having a 4-pound camera hanging from your neck isn't that fun. Plus, I'm not really quite sure about the integrity of these strap lugs. I just didn't want to chance it. Before I could use this camera, I had to do some work on it, and mostly it had to do with the fact that a lot of the gears were just old. It ground a lot, and it was simply because all the lubrication had dried, and it just needed some attention. The lens itself had a problem. Oh yes, it really didn't focus, so I had to disassemble the lens and re-lubricate the lens. The older lenses are much easier to work on than newer lenses, so that didn't really take me much time at all. Luckily, this lens was in very good condition. As I mentioned earlier, it is a coated lens, and coating often helps protect it from those cleaning marks. And you can see from this view just how clean it is. Remember, this small hole matches up with that pin and helps lock it in position. So there you have it. I don't really have a whole lot else to say about the Exakta 66 vertical. You probably won't see many today. If you do, and you happen to be able to buy one for a reasonable sum, I would say go ahead and grab it. Expect that it's going to need some service, because by now the camera is more than 70 years old, and anything mechanical that's more than 70 years old certainly is going to need some type of work. Don't forget to check those shutter curtains. And if you want, you could also take a look and see if your slow speeds work. There's a lot to this camera to get it to work correctly. I think you'll be rewarded. And you'll certainly be the only kid on the block with an Exakta 66 vertical. You can almost guarantee that. Not 100%, but you can pretty well guarantee it. And that brings us to the end of this video. This is a look at the Exakta 66 vertical of 1953 and 1954. Don't forget to give me a like and subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment below. Or you can send me an email at contact@camera-talk.net. And if you enjoyed this, click on this icon in the lower right corner of the screen for more videos about cameras and photography. And I'll see you on the next video.